I really want to be careful with video titles like this because I am not the kind of YouTuber anymore to create how to sound like X artist. I'm also not the YouTuber to be like, oh, look at me, I can flex in sound design that I can recreate anybody's sound and whatnot. However, I do think that it's okay to take some inspiration and say, hey, I like this person's sound, so we're going to see if we can make our own version of it and maybe learn a thing or two in between. My name is Alckemy, everybody. Welcome to the channel. We're going to be using some hardware and some software in order to create some cool vibes, mainly sending some crazy saw waves through the analog heat plus effects in order to get some ethereal, vibey, dystopian, synthy sounds. And we'll be using the Oxy 1 sequencer to try to come up with a cool melody, and I'll be showing you how to get cool stuff out of all that. With that being said, I'm not Lorn. You're not Lorn. If Lorn sees this video, I think that he's American. Would love for you to give us some tips on what's going on, but we're just going to kind of take that and run with it. Now, one thing is you don't need any of this stuff. If you have something like analog emulation, like DistTube Culture, some analog synths, something like that, even though it's binary with zeros and ones, analog emulation is very close. So you don't need actual hardware. It's just kind of like nice and feels kind of like authentic, you know, to even just send something that's, I guess, a hybrid, because this is both digital and analog, and see what kind of stuff we can get. One more disclaimer. I know that he is notorious for taking sounds and recording them from various speakers and then reincorporating that within his production. We're not going to be doing that today because I don't feel like it, but we will just be trying to get to the sound design part of the initial sounds and whatnot. You don't need any of this gear, like I said before. The Oxy 1 sequencer, you can recreate a lot of really cool stuff in Bitwig or in Ableton, but I will be showcasing something that I do like about this, which will be moving this a little bit downwards just so you can see the pattern that we're going to be working on and having some fun. So be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for the 20K. We got a DistTube Culture giveaway coming soon, so stay tuned for that. And let's go ahead and jump in. So what I'm going to do is start with some saw waves here, and nothing crazy. Let's go ahead and give this just a little bit of attack, and then we're going to give this just a little bit of decay. Sometimes you might want to leave a little bit of sustain, at least on phase plant, because if you don't, then sometimes you lose the release. See? So sometimes if you have just a little bit of sustain on here, then you can... There we go. Nice and easy. We want to set the polyphony to something low, especially when we get into using this here. And we might start with maybe like 4 or so, because we're going to start making some crazy stuff. But let's go ahead and add some unison to this, maybe like 7, and then we'll turn the detuning up. If we want to make this really harsh, then we might even choose like hard. No, that's, I do like the flanging sound of that, but it's a little bit much, so that's kind of cool too. It's a little bit quiet. Let's go ahead and beef this up just a little bit with some saturation. Maybe go back to smooth. Now, one thing that we can do is we can either do this on the heat or we can do this here, and I do want to experiment with both, but something that I'm going to do to give this just a little bit of authenticity, quote unquote, is we're going to cheat this a bit by, actually we'll leave this on free, and we're going to set this to kind of a relatively slow rate, kind of like so, maybe a little bit slower, and we are going to modulate the pitch at like, I don't know, plus 40 at the most, maybe minus 56. So this is going to detune at like half a cent. So now check this out. I do feel like it's a bit much though, so let's go ahead and back off to maybe like 0.30. Sounds pretty good. Let's go ahead and turn that limiter up. Now, if you're only doing this within phase plant, or say you're doing this in operator or anything that has unison on it, you can always just add reverb with this distortion, and then after you can use something like the disk tube culture. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I do have a clipper at the end just because when we start pushing the analog heat effects, it's going to gain stage, and then it's going to get really loud. So we want to try to give ourselves plenty of headroom to work with. But if you have something like the disk tube culture, this is one of my favorite distortion plugins, especially for drums and stuff. But you can kind of just crank this. Now obviously it sounds a little bit broken, so we'll adjust the bias. And then we can pull the mix down a bit. Pretty fat already. I had to turn my speakers up just a little bit to make sure that this wasn't sounding super thin. So if you have any kind of, waves or UAD audio or something that has some kind of tube distortion or even saturation, some kind of analog clipper, soft clipper, overdrive, whatever, you're good to go. However, since we have the luxury of building something timbre-wise within this little box here, I think that it would be fun and customary to try to make something based off of what I was inspired by for this purchase in the first place. And if you haven't seen it, I'll leave a link in the description, but we have a short where I make a neurobass with this by utilizing the bandpass filters that are built into the individual effects, which I'll not make one, but quickly show you. So you see that there's a filter here. There is a filter on this guy. So if we turn the bass down, you've got all these little filters that you can assign LFOs in within this to be able to create interesting movement patterns and stuff. And even though it's not perfect, it's not the most robust, you can still get some pretty nice mileage out of it if you are smart and clever, or just cheeky rather. And you can go see how I did that on the short. It takes like 50 seconds to go through. So with that being said, we are going to need to set some stuff up. We're going to move the compressor at the end. I can do this on the effect heat thing, but I'm just going to do it here for now because that way you can kind of follow along and look at this effect chain in case if you want to follow along. So what I'm going to do is mindlessly aim around. We're going to use the heat first. Then let's go ahead and set the bass mono from second to last. And this is just going to mono everything that is below, say, 136 Hertz. We're going to add some reverb here and set this to mix. And we're going to have to mess with all these settings here in a second. But let me go ahead and play some notes and see how this sounds. That's nice. So as you can see, this is still relatively quiet. The compressor, actually everything by nature, makes stuff super duper quiet. So we're going to push this threshold down to maybe just a little bit and set the ratio to 20. We're going to have a fast attack, relatively fast release, because we don't really want this compressor to duck this that much. So now we'll apply some makeup gain until this starts to break. Which is pretty nice. Now obviously we've got some reverb and we've got some delay on here, so let's go ahead and clean that up, and that way this will kind of make some space for the notes to come in, because if it's just reverb and delay that's stacking on top of each other, you get that nasty distortion that I don't think is all that interesting or great. So we are going to start with the delay, and we are going to turn back the delay amount and change the depth to 0. Now we're going to grab the reverb here and change the reverb amount basically down to 0. And what this is going to do is this envelope follower is going to say anytime a signal goes above or below this line, I'd say above this line, it's going to duck these two. Envelope following is something that you can do in Bitwig, something that you can do in Faceplant. It's a pretty standard modulator thing that you can use, and it's pretty neat when it comes into trying to clean sounds up. So you see how we still have a clean sound whenever we hit a note? And then the space comes in. That's pretty nice. So let's just go ahead and kind of recap on some of this other stuff. We've got a heat going on right now. This is on the saturation. We can turn the mix all the way up if we want to try to see what's going on with that. Maybe back off the mix just a bit. We've got a pretty nice balance here. The drive isn't being cranked too much. We're not pushing the level too hard. We just got a nice sound going on here. It is kind of quiet over on the recording, so if we need to turn this volume up, then we can always push the gain up a little bit harder. So there we go. And then I'll adjust this on the gain so that way we're not getting any feedback from the mic. But as opposed to just using the heat on here as to like full send, you know, full crank, you absolutely can do that, but it's going to get super muddy very fast. And if you use the distortion on the delay and the reverb, it's going to kind of, well, it's going to kind of smear everything a bit. One thing that we might want to try though is we are going to want to mess with this filter here in a bit. But before we do that, there's this little dirt knob here that's like extra grid and extra, I think it's just saturation, if I'm not mistaken. I don't actually know what it is. I should probably look at the manual, but we can go in here and adjust this dirt and see if we can give this a little bit more bite. Now maybe something else that might be nice with this is to give this some attack and see what we can get from there. This is really thick, really thick. We might want to clean this up with some EQ at some point. Not with this one in particular, but more so in the mids. And unfortunately, this is only a low and high shelf. But within this, we can also change the filtering a bit, maybe with a bit of resonance, and play some nice keys. Now, I don't know if you noticed or not, but whenever I played a chord, it got super muddy. So for this particular kind of sound, you probably want to back off. Something that I learned from some of my viewers, Avon in particular, is that if you apply saturation or you apply distortion to a per voice, so I'll show you what that looks like, as opposed to doing it the way that we've done it in the analog heat plus effects, if you go to poly, and you play a chord with this, it's going to apply the distortion to each individual voice, which does take up more CPU, but it will make things a little cleaner. So sometimes you can get away with playing chords with distortion if you do things that way. See how much cleaner that sounds? And if you do it without, I don't know if you can tell the difference or not, but it sounds a lot more muddy whenever you apply that saturation to the whole thing as opposed to each individual voice. Just a food for thought. So now that we have this, we are going to turn this bad boy on, and you're not really going to see what I'm doing with this a whole lot. I just kind of want to talk about the sequencing thing, and all you really need to do is understand what's happening with the lights. So there's a multi-track sequencer within this, actually lots of different kinds of sequencing options, but something that is actually really cool about Lorn's Acid Rain is that it's not just a repeating pattern. Or if it is, it's not repeating every 4 bars or everything like that. It's something that kind of just seems like it's running on its own, kind of reminiscent of some analog modular gear or something, which I imagine is what he used. And so to try to compose in the spirit of that, I think that what we want to do is utilize that maybe with a multi-track here. And we are going to set something up to where we are going to take this and set this to multi-track mode. The reason why we need multi-track mode is because we can change each individual stepper both in transpositioning everything and then also setting an individual rate. So if I hit play on this, you'll see that this one bar like this is going at a straight line. But if I hit division on this, check this out. Same thing here. I'm going to turn that back off for a hot sec. You'll start to notice that these guys are going to be running at different times. So if I go here and maybe use these two encoders to kind of switch something up, maybe set that to 1/2, set that to 1/16, 1/4. Now you're starting to see that these are running at different moments in time. And what makes this really special to me is that not only can you do it this way and have everything kind of run at these different rates, you can also set the note length if you want to. So let's say I want this to change, I think it's this encoder, maybe the third one, there we go. So we can change this encoder here to how many different steps with this purple, you probably can't see it, of how long this goes. So if we were to grab track 1, per se, and set the end of this to 8, you'll see that this is only going to go up to the middle, and then it's going to reset. Boop. Now having this with this free running thing on this is really amazing, and I think that it's a great way to compose. It's a very fun way to compose, and it's meant to be in a way that you're going to get variation, but you're also going to have some kind of relative relationship, some kind of controlled chaos. And if you know anything about me, you know that I like to work in random, but I like to kind of put intention into the random. The other thing that we can do with some of these tracks, maybe not all of them, is we can set a direction and a division. So what that means is you'll see that everything is moving towards the right. But if I set a couple of these to go backwards, well, look, now this one is tracking the opposite direction. Maybe on track 3, and this is before we even put notes, I'll set that to be in the opposite direction as well, and maybe do a time percentage of a direction, so that way something every once in a while, about 8% of the time, is just going to be a little bit off. It's pretty neat if you ask me, and I love to just watch stuff like this move. So now we need to go back into this and give ourselves a scale. I think that we're going to write in maybe say Phrygian. Let's go D sharp, and we're just going to start with a note here. We're going to go to a bass line, and on this one I'm going to set this to E0. Give this a couple of spaces, then I'm going to set this one to D sharp, and with this one, this D sharp, we're going to set this to D sharp 0, and now whenever I play this, you're going to see that I forgot, but this is only going to the 8th step. So what we might want to do is go back to this, and set the endpoint back to 16. Now maybe within this one, we don't want this to play every single time, so we might turn the trigger down on this. Now, every once in a while this is going to play, so not every single time, but this will kind of move itself around 18% of the time with this. Maybe bring that up just a little bit more. And now, within all these steps, we can kind of program something that might have a cool relationship. We want to try to be a little bit sparse with this. I'm going to go ahead and move this division here on this one to 1/4, so that way we've got a little bit more time in between. I'm also going to cut this just a little bit earlier, I think, so that way we're not hitting a bass note the entire time whenever this triggers. And suddenly, we're playing around with some really nice melodic content that we can use to start recording. Now, not every time, not every bar, this is going to sound really good. But what I do think is going to sound good is taking the best parts of this and running that and lapping that. If for whatever reason this is a little bit too unpredictable, then what you can always do is come back into the DAW this way and record your MIDI this way. So that's one awesome thing that I love about the Oxy One sequencer, is that for one, getting the script and all that to install and making sure that this works and is compatible with Bitwig. Bitwig was a breeze. But now that we have this, what we can do is to just set the MIDI on here. Let's set this to 1. Not really sure. There we go. And we can just record the MIDI through this for maybe 8 bars. And then we can actually turn this off. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we can actually turn the analog heat off. And then we'll bring that back in so that way we have a little bit more predictable results. And you can record this crazy, moving and evolving sequence for as long as you want. But I find that, 8, 16 bars, you want it to have some kind of familiarity. If it's just random the whole time for 3 minutes, then it's kind of difficult to catch on. And I don't know about you, but there were several times when I was waiting for that home to hit with this. I was waiting for it to go, there it is. That's that feeling. And I think that's a really important component that I've noticed with the Acid Rain melody, right? Because it's the da na 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 da da da, and it just kind of leaves you hanging and just kind of decides like it wants to come back at any point in time. And I do think that was intentional, and maybe that was part of the vibe of the tune. And this is all philosophical speculation. I don't fucking know. But at the same time, it is really inspiring to take some of those ideas, whether intentional or not, and apply that to some of the composition that we have. So check this out. So as you can see, the pattern phrasing of this is kind of all over the place. And when the bass notes come out, it's the same pattern, but it's not being played at specific intervals or divisions of 4. It's kind of like going at its own pace. It is a polyrhythm, so to speak, that kind of has a mind of its own, but still has a lot of familiarity. So now that we have that, what I will do with this later is I'm actually going to save this pattern and project, because I think that this is a really pretty melody that I got lucky enough that came up on this video. But now that we have something like that, we can go ahead and turn the analog heat effect back on, and we can get something that is going to be a little bit more predictable every time, and perhaps even resample this or something. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like with the effects back on, and hopefully you all are having a good time just vibing out with me. So obviously there's some other things that we can do in order to either control this, but keep in mind that because we printed the MIDI, it is very easy to go back and edit some of this stuff now. I wouldn't even necessarily say that it needs anything particular, but I do hear one more note in this that I think might be kind of nice. And I kind of just want to do this just to relay to you all of like, hey, just because we did it here doesn't mean that you can't go back and fix some of these things, or you can't go back and change this into some kind of off timing or something. You know what I mean? Which I kind of like everything being on grid. Maybe I can set some time shift to where everything's a little bit late whenever I start thinking about what kind of beat I want to put over this. But at the same time, I really want to hear a da da da. So let me see if I can find that. So now we just added one note to this. And it's super off, because normally this ending or this resolution to this melody right here, at least to me, and I'm just like speaking out of pure passion and inspiration, so please don't quote me on any kind of academia or, you know, being an expert on how to make dystopian crazy synth music or whatever, but it does feel to me like this da 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 would be at the end of the 8th bar and the 16th bar respectively. But again, kind of putting it a little bit in a different place gives you a little bit of a different flavor, a little bit of a different phrasing, and to me it still works. It's off, but it's still kind of connected. There's something that's still holding it together. So that's part of the reason why I love using the Oxy One sequencer. And I think that it's very likely that whoever's watching this does not have all the gear that I have. But even still, I find that there's a lot of different pieces of inspiration that you can take from this video, whether it be using, you know, hardware for the sonic characteristic building, using the detuning from Faceplant, using the sequencing aspect from a hardware sequencer, or, you know, from whatever sequencer you might have. There's software versions of stuff that can do things like this. I think that combined, you can get some very awesome and inspiring results. And, you know, I think that this is a good interpretation of trying to create something in the style of, without necessarily trying to copy or steal everything from. You know what I mean? There's no other Lorn. There's only one Lorn. There's only one Noise. There's only one Cohen sound. There's only one me and only one of you. And I definitely want to try to sway people towards not just like 100% replication of, you know, oh, this sounds exactly like this, but more so in a means of, I really like this essence from this. I really like this idea. I like this phrasing and this intention behind what this artist is doing. Regardless of how close I am or not, this is what I got from listening to it. And I want to try to imprint some of that onto my viewers. So hopefully this was super interesting. If you all have any questions about anything else, would love to give you my insight on whatever I have. If you want to listen to something that I've written kind of in the style of Lorn, I guess, if you will, I've got this 2-hour long video. I think it's the first video that's on there. It's the Unfinished Sorrows. It's an unfinished track that I ended up putting up, and you can go listen to it there and have fun listening to the drums and, you know, the big sounds and whatnot. But anyways, thank you all so much for the 20K. I hope that we are onward and upward. And if you like this video, I would love you to leave a comment. Tell me what you're drinking right now. I'm drinking water. And sincerely, thank you all. I really appreciate it and hope that to give you much awesome content in the future. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you later.